Hello and welcome to today's Transformation Manager blog. Today we'll be looking at building the structure of the transforms up, and this will include things such as taking one source table and moving it to many target tables. So let's begin. So as we can see from last time, we moved our aeroplane information over to our aeroplane database table, and we'd also taken information from our turbine blades and moved that over to our engine table. So just as a refresh, if we have a look back at the initial files we're bringing in, then we can see that we had an aeroplane flat file, and you can see we had a turbine blade flat file. But as we can see when we look at the turbine blade, we have information about engine, an engine name in there. We also have information about cost and currency, along with information about the types of bolt. So when we're migrating this information over to our target database, we can see that we need to migrate it into the various tables. So we have an aeroplane table, we have the engine table, which will take some of the turbine blade information. We have a turbine table, which will take some more of the turbine blade information. We also have a turbine cost table, which again will take some of the cost and currency information. And finally we have a bolts table, and this information will be populated from a new file called nuts and bolts that we also have in our input file model. So let's begin to move the data over. Firstly, now we have moved the information that we want to move into the engine, we need to look about moving the information down into the turbine. So again, we can add a note in here to indicate we're going to cascade down to the turbine blade. And what we can do, if we right click on here, we can view inverse relationships. And what this is allowing us to do is to see any inverse relationships coming into the engine. And we can see we have one to the aeroplane, which we come from, and we also have one to the turbine called iTurbine. And if I expand that out, I can see all the information about a particular turbine. And further down we can see that we have the relationship to the bolts, to the turbine cost, and also the inverse relationship back to the engine. So what we need to do is have a look at how we move this over. If we look on our source side, we can see we have our turbine blades, but we need to add again a new kind of relationship, and this time what we're going to create is what's called a self relationship. And by selecting that, you can see it adds a self relationship directly in there, and all that does is a reference round to itself basically. So on the source side we will stay at the turbine blades level, but on the target side what we want to do is go down to the turbine. So again, we can drag and drop to create the link. We can see now we have our cascade to the turbine blade. And again, I right click, navigate, create cascade. You can see it's selected the ones that we want. It's dependent again. And now you can see on the source side we still have the turbine blade. We've stayed with itself. And on the target we've gone down now, and we're actually going to populate a second table from this turbine blade file, which is the turbine. And again, we'll do this similar kind of mapping, so we can move the one-to-one stuff directly across. So the description as well as the blade ID. And it may be for description even that we can enhance that. Again, as we did in one of our previous demonstrations, we may want to add maybe a bit of information in brackets, so we could add the blade ID, say. So we could enhance our descriptions. And again, we'll put the closing brackets in there. So now we can see we've got our description, and we're going to enhance it by putting the blade ID in brackets also. And then we can continue our mapping. We can move the names. So we have the name across. And you can see now, so we've set our blade ID, we've set our name, we've set our description. The only other two fields we have are two foreign keys indicated by the green icon. And they are engine ID and attachment bolt. So engine ID is going to get set automatically when we cascade down to this transform because the engine ID is already available to us in our related transform at the top there. And again, we can have a look at this so we can see we have the aeroplane goes down to the engine and then goes down to the turbine. So the engine ID will get set. The attachment bolt we need to do, and to do this we can create yet another cascade. And if we cascade down to the bolts, and for this one we actually do need to go down on both sides. So you can see we have the bolts there. On the turbine blade we don't currently have a relationship, so that's something we need to create. And to do that we can right click, we can add another new relationship, set the destination as nuts and bolts. We can give it a forward name of 2 bolts, and we can give it an inverse name of, if we just prefix it with an I 2 bolts. If we have a look at the cardinality, we can see on the forward side that the turbine blade will, in this case, only going to relate to a maximum of 1 type of bolt. On the inverse side, the bolt could be used within many turbine blades, so we'll change the maximum cardinality there to be star to indicate many. If we click to the conditions, hit new, in this case we're going to choose the attributes. So from the turbine blade it's the attachment bolt. From the target, the nuts and bolts, it's the bolt ID. And click OK. And we'll click OK to complete that relationship. So now we have our 2 bolts relationship, which relates us from our turbine blade to our nuts and bolts file. And now we can see the information about the nuts and bolts file there. Once we have that, again, we can create the cascade. Just drag and drop to create it. Puts that line in. Create the cascade. It's dependent. Click OK. And we can now drag and drop the bolt ID to bolt ID, the size, the thread, and the thickness. And there we go. That's the bolts done. Go back up to our turbine blade. So that's our bolts done. Next is to look at the costs. So we can create another cascade to cost. And in this case, we do not need to create a new relationship on the turbine blade. Our cost information is already in that flat file coming in. But if we look on the turbine side, again, review the inverses, we can see the turbine cost. So we can drag and drop turbine cost to self, create that link, and then we can create the cascade again by right clicking, navigate or create cascade. And finally we're going to drag the cost over to set the primary key there in the turbine cost table. And for now what we'll do is we'll just hit build to check as we've gone along that we haven't made any mistakes that are going to cause us errors. You can see we have a number of warnings still about the way we're creating from optional information on our source side. But for now we'll accept that. We can navigate up to the caller. We can see that we've got our 2 cascades that we've added in there to create our bolts, to create our costs. So we're feeding turbine blades has fed the engine if we navigate up. So it's fed the engine. Navigate to the cascades from the turbine blade. We're also pushing information into the turbine. And again, as we navigate down to the cost, the turbine blade is also pushing information into the turbine cost table. Navigating back up, we can see that also we're going to move information to the bolts, and we do that actually by navigating down on the source side to the nuts and bolts and to the bolts table on the target. And again, once we're happy with that, we can build it and we can launch the migrator to run it. We can hit run. We can see that's completed. We can have a look here. We can connect up to our engine database. And again, we can start to view the data. So we can view our airplanes that we've seen before. We can view our engines. We could view the bolts that have come in. We can have a look in the turbines. And we can have a look in the turbine costs. And what you'll notice is that we've gone down and gone through these. All the foreign keys have been set up for us as we've navigated down. TM automatically does that for us, so we don't need to worry about setting those foreign keys. They are implicitly done by TM as we're navigating down. And again, if we wanted to do that and have a look from the top, if I pick the Boeing 737, I could navigate and see what its engine is. I could see for that engine what the turbine is, and you can see that engine has 3 different types of turbine that it can be. And then if I navigate from one of these, we could have a look at the bolts, and there's a single bolt related to that turbine. So it allows us to actually step down and see the individual data all the way through now, from the aeroplane right the way down the structure that we've created. Well, that completes our demonstration for today. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.